I've heard you say before that you advise against just trying to memorize the information and thinking that you're going to be able to walk in there and like put it on paper or type it up in a coherent manner without practice. And that's why it's so important to have a third party read your essay, because you do think you answered it. You know, your brain is filling in those gaps, like Scott said, when, you know, some third party person might read it and just be like, what are you talking about here? Like, you need to approach this like you're writing a technical right? Like, you're a technical writer, you are describing these processes or these techniques or whatever step by step so that they understand that you understand it, right? They need to know that you get it. If you think they're going to conclude that you understand it by showing off a universe of surrounding knowledge, then you didn't get to the core, right?
Oh, God. It's really complicated.
What's up, beer geeks? Welcome back to the Advanced Cicerone FAQ series. We are answering all of your frequently asked questions about the Advanced Cicerone exam. We've got Will D with us. He's a certified Cicerone who's taking the AC in 3 months, so he's really getting focused now, although he's been studying for years, reading about beer, and he passed the certified Cicerone exam a couple years back. And we've got Advanced Cicerones, Chris Crow and Scott Fielder and myself here to answer all of your frequently asked questions. And we've got a couple other episodes we've already done, including one about, do you need to memorize the quantitative data? One of the most common questions we get. What does game day look like when you're taking the test? There's a lot of good information in this series, and you should watch them all if you are thinking about taking the AC or you've already signed up. So today we're going to answer the questions, how did we practice writing essays? With the ultimate goal of answering the question, essentially, of, you know, what level of detail is the Cicerone program looking for when it comes to your essay answers, and in a kind of more general sense, sort of how in depth do you need to go with your level of knowledge? And Will asked us this question, and he included a few things that he was like, you know, do I need to memorize this? Do I need to memorize that? So we can't give you, you know, super specific information like what the questions that we got on the test were, but we can give you some general thoughts on these questions. So I'll start. And so, you know, how did I practice writing essays? I honestly, you know, I went to law school and I wrote so many essays, and I didn't actually practice writing essays. But I think in talking to you guys, you passed it much more recently. I think Chris Crow, in particular, you've said, I've heard you say before that you advise against just trying to memorize the information and thinking that you're going to be able to walk in there and like put it on paper or type it up in a coherent manner without practice.
Yeah, I think that that's a mistake that people make, that they kind of overestimate how good they are at just like naturally writing an essay when they have the available information. And I think a fun way to think about it is like, what's your best hobby that you fancy yourself kind of a pseudo expert on? Could you just write an essay about a subtopic of that topic on the fly? And yeah, you could, but what was super valuable to me was to literally just the process of sitting down and writing it out as if it was an essay, because the idea of, you know, regurgitating the information verbally versus in you know, the written word, it's just like, it's hard to translate that into that medium on the fly. And so honestly, even more in terms of the essays than just the knowledge base that I kind of already had from reading the books and everything, that was helpful was just the process of writing an essay.
Right.
You know, if you're like me, I just turned 38, you know, so I hadn't like written an academic essay in, you know, 16 years or whatever.
Right.
And so, you know, I fancy myself a pretty good writer, but just literally going through the process of doing it was so helpful to me.
Yeah, people who have learned some material, I think vastly overestimate their ability to coherently communicate their knowledge to someone else. I mean, that is just across the board true. Everybody thinks they're a good writer, but until you actually have someone else read an essay that you wrote that was a timed essay where you had to like barf out everything you know in a coherent manner, until you do that, you're not going to really know. Because this is, a test situation. The clock is running. Ideally, you write in a linear manner where you have your main idea and your, expanded thoughts on that. And so, my own story on the essays, I would say that's informative in this way is I got a 37 on a question that when I read it, I was like, sweet, I know all about this. And I wrote, in, probably great detail what I thought about that question. And I got a 37 on it. Why was that? I'm going to guess that it's because I went on a bunch of tangents thinking that I would impress them by saying like, oh, see all this stuff I know, around this, without actually answering the question. I'm just guessing. I'm not sure, but I didn't hit the main points, clearly, right? I clearly did not hit the main points they were looking for on that. There was another question that I got where I read the question and was like, oh, shit, I don't know this very well at all. It was like something related to like a piece of draft equipment that I didn't really know very well at all because I'd never done much in the way of like managing a draft system. But I knew just enough to kind of get the main points down, and I got an 80 on that one. So, I mean, I think that's the lesson is make sure what you're writing makes sense, get your main points out there, and really hammer those home so that they understand that you really get it on those points before you start going into tangent land and trying to show off. I think that's what I took away from that. And my main advice on this whole topic and all this, like, to what depth should I know things to and all that, my main advice on that and what I did was I approached prepping for the AC as though I were trying to prep for the MC. Now, in retrospect, I realized that, like, had I taken the MC, I was woefully unprepared for that. But that's how I approached it. I did what I thought I would need to do to pass the Master Cicerone exam. And I passed the AC with a score that was decent, but like I would have gotten destroyed on the MC. I now know from talking to MCs. But like that is how I approached it. What do you think, Scott? What was your approach?
So here are just some practical things that Chris and I did that were really helpful. First thing, we really don't advise grading your own essays. If there's somebody else whose eyes you can, have, if somebody else can look at them and look through them, it's really helpful because one of the things we often do is we write things and then in our brain we fill in all of the blanks. But if somebody else were to read it, how they would potentially interpret that could just be up in the air. And you have to remember, they're not going to say, what did you mean by this when you wrote this in your second paragraph? They're just going to interpret it with what they have, and that you don't want to leave that up to chance. We do, Chris and I do essay practice for folks. We've had people who we've worked with, and we generate questions. And the other practical part of that is we usually recommend doing 4 essay questions at a time and giving yourself 90 minutes to do so. It gives you a little bit of that kind of pressure. Maybe you might have a little bit more than that, but 90 is a pretty good number where you feel like you've got to keep working and you can't just sit there and think for forever. And that's how many you do in a section on the exam. So you're getting ready. We did this so much that both of my sections, I felt like I took as much time as I needed, and I had taken almost exactly 90 minutes to do the essay portions. Like that's how much we had practiced. But we helped someone with a question, and we gave them just kind of like a troubleshooting question. We said, your slowest bit, the slowest selling beer at your bar is an English mild, and now it tastes like cardboard. Why could that be? And one of the first things that they said is, this sounds like you might, or they say, this is probably a result of oxidation due to aged beer. That's a pretty general thing to say. It's not super specific. If I'm hearing cardboard as the person who's grading it, I'm thinking they're talking about trans-2-nonanol. If they're saying it's because of oxidation due to aged beer, that's really not exactly how T2N is actually formed. It's how it ends up being perceivable, but that's not exactly where it comes from. So you can kind of see that there's a lot to be interpreted there. And you want to be more specific. That's one of the big things about, I think we'll talk about this in another portion, but the biggest leap is just how you have to communicate in these things. It has to be more specific. Yeah, you have to, and this is also, we've talked about how the BJCP is, a good resource that you have to study. When we were learning to write essays, because you will get a beer style one, as we've said before, you can regurgitating the BJCP word for word. If you are given some beer styles, that will not be good for you, because I think as advanced cicerones, it's our job to actually study the BJCP, but then be able to look at it with a critical eye.
Oh yeah,
and to say, what really is a hop ester? Is that really a thing? Certain ways that things are said, we're called to kind of go beyond that or to look at it critically. And so, another good example of that is if you get asked about a German beer or a beer, any beer that just has noble hop character, putting spicy, herbal, or floral for flavor compounds is not good enough.
No.
You have to be talking about dried mint, cooked thyme, bergamot tea. You have to be getting really specific. And so those are one of the things we really tried to do was always pushing each other on, better descriptors, being more specific if you can. And then the way where we kind of found out where it was, okay, this is how far we have to go, is that I tried to come up with a good example, and maybe this will be a good one, but I kind of imagined if I was being asked about talking about vanillin, in barrel aging, how does that get formed and what is vanillin? Well, vanillin is a phenolic aldehyde. It's derived from lignans, and it gets into, beer when it's extracted from a barrel where that's been exposed to heat or mild acidity. That's how vanillin is formed, and then beer being in the barrel is how it gets in there. Then if I were to be asked or to go on to talk about why exactly chemically vanillin happens because of mild heat or acidity, you can kind of see we're out of the realm of beer now.
Right.
And I kind of need to be a chemist and not necessarily a beer expert. So for me, it's kind of stay on the freeway, answer the question that they've asked is the biggest thing. Because again, going off on tangents that aren't there, they just won't help you. And if you say something wrong, they might choose to dock you for it. We don't know.
Yeah,
they're well within their right to do that.
Yep.
And I think of it as a freeway. Your essay is a freeway, and you're going to have to get off on a few exits. But if you get off on too many and you get lost, you're in deep trouble. And if you can't find your way back, it's not going to be it's not going to be too great. And you'll start to realize kind of where too far is too far. For me, it was glycol chillers. I was asking Master Cicerone Brian Reed some weird questions, and he was just look, you don't have to be a refrigerator expert, and that gave me a lot of peace of mind. That's right. They're not asking me to be a refrigeration expert. I don't need to know how exactly all of this makes refrigerant. I just need to know how it maybe relates to, service and how to maybe troubleshoot it or something, or how to take care of one, just stuff that's in, it's look to the draft quality manual, look to the syllabus, that's how deep you need to go.
Once you've gotten
those are great.
Once you've gotten more than a step or so away from the core of what made this beer be the way it is, you're going too far.
Right.
That's just the reality of it. If you find yourself doing too much, a bunch of chemistry, then you're almost certainly taking it too far. You're off the rails.
I want to make something sound really important, which there's such a huge kernel in there of what Scott said that dovetails with the idea of just practicing essays in general, is make sure you're answering the question that was asked, because even less about, when's the last time you actually wrote out an essay, when's the last time you took a test of any kind. A lot of young brilliant people can pass this exam, obviously, and they've taken some tests a little bit more recently, but the last time I took an actual exam of any kind, and I think what happens is you see the essay question, and let's just say in general the topic is about Belgian Golden Strong Ale, and you're I know everything about Belgian Golden Strong Ale, and you just start writing and you regurgitate everything. Well, I'm telling you now, basically every essay question on the exam, this doesn't give anything away, but it is hyper specific and it's bullet pointed about what they are asking you. And so if you just regurgitate everything you know about Belgian Golden Strong Ale, you run the risk of missing the point of some of the bullet points of the question.
Right.
So practicing writing the essays is just as important as being cognizant of what is being asked.
Yep. And that's why it's so important to have a third party read your essay, because you do think you answered it, and you do think, your brain is filling in those gaps, like Scott said, when, some third party person might read it and just be like, what are you talking about here? Like, you need to approach this like you're writing a technical right? Like, you're a technical writer, you are describing these processes or these techniques or whatever step by step so that they understand that you understand it, right? They need to know that you get it. If you think they're going to conclude that you understand it by showing off a universe of surrounding knowledge, then you didn't get to the core, right?
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah. In one of your follow-up questions there, you were asking, like, do I need to memorize things like the size of spider mites that might cause, hop plants diseases, or the temperatures used to produce certain malts? And it's like, no, definitely not, because you can see how that gets you like kind of a step or two away from the core beer knowledge that you need. Like, that's expertise in a ridiculously specific area. Like, you're not a hop farmer, you're not a maltster. You should have a general vague understanding of these things, right? Like, you should know the relationship between temperature, humidity, and time when it comes to making different kinds of malt. Do you need to know exactly how to do it? No, of course not, right? You need to know, that caramel malt is made with high humidity, but you don't need to know what that humidity level is, right? I've never read that information in my life. I don't even know where to find that. It's probably in some like $300 textbook that only maltsters have. So, that's just not where you need to take it. Now, I mean, in the broadest sense of like this question, how in depth do I need to go with my level of knowledge? Essentially, I'll go back to what I said before. Approach this like you're studying for the MC. You need a deep and encyclopedic level of knowledge. But when you do get asked a specific question, you need to answer that question and not go off the rails and not go into tangent land. Otherwise, you will get a 37 on a question that you actually know the answer to.
Right.
Right. That's...
And the other thing about that too, a myth that we've often heard is that there's some sort of like word like minimum that you have to write. Like, we heard before we took it that like if you want to get a good score, you have to write at least 500 words. And I'm guessing this was a new addition, but when we took the exam, in the essay it says there is no minimum word count. So that is not, and it made sense because we had seen people post, the AC essays are so hard. I wrote 8 pages handwritten for each answer, and I only averaged an 80 on all of my essays. And looking back on it now, it's like, yeah, you probably talked about a lot of stuff that they did not ask you to talk about.
Well, and like you mentioned before, you're also, when you go off the rails, you're giving them, instead of giving them an opportunity to award you more points, what you're really doing is giving them opportunities to be like, oh, that wasn't quite right. I'm going to ding them for that, right? Because those things that you're talking about aren't things that they're giving points for. But you can reveal that you don't know what you're talking about by going off the rails into depths that you shouldn't be swimming in. And, I would say, the final piece of advice I would like to give to just close out this little section of the AC FAQ is this. When I was prepping, what I did, I took hundreds of pages of notes. Like, every book I read, I was taking notes in them and all that, right? And I kind of more or less came up with like this giant outline. And every now and then I would just read through that whole thing, because after having, some time away from it and then going back to some of that material that I'd read maybe weeks or months ago and reading my notes in that giant notebook and outline, I was able to see where I didn't where I actually didn't really understand it very well. Like having just a little bit of distance, I was able to see like, oh, I don't understand the why of this. Like I've memorized some factoids, but I don't understand why. And then I would go back to that material and get it to that greater depth of knowledge that to me at the time I thought was on a master level. And that is a person who was at the time a CC thinking they were getting ready for master. And that is what I think everyone should be trying to do. So
I was going to give some more practical advice on just how to practice.
Do it.
essays.
Let's hear it.
So if you're having trouble generating questions, beer styles are super easy. You just generate do a number generator with the BJCP styles, and then that's the one you have to write on.
Oh, wow.
And, you can look at because Cicerone has, they've got those practice, AC questions on their website.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of use that as a format. They kind of give one question that I think the one they have on their website is for Weizenbach, and it says, what laws in Germany, would dictate what what does it mean for it to be a Weizenbach? It's got to have 50% wheat malt. It's got to have a certain starting degrees Plato. That one you might have to come up with your own or just leave that one out. But using that as a metric is great, and just pick a beer style. And then the other one or the other two, if you just pick a chapter out of cellarmanship and write an essay. That works really well. Just pick, chapter 3 and just look at the name of the chapter and then just write as much as you can about that. Or for off flavors that are in the syllabus, those are easy. Again, just assign each of them a number and generate 4 of them and just write out how they happen, how they can be prevented, what their flavor compounds, maybe what those are supposed to smell like, maybe where do they show up in certain styles? Is it something people even want? Is it desirable in some places? Is it like if you were to talk about diacetyl or something like that? Those are super easy ones that you can do on your own. But if you really wanted to go in more depth, you need to just reach out to Chris and I, and we can help you with that. We can generate you some questions. We can meet up with you. We can give you feedback. It's super duper valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you get to pay us money.
Right. And
yeah, absolutely.
eventually we're going to have the whole course out there, and it's going to be very comprehensive. And for now, we are potential resources to people who reach out to us to help you out. Kind of like we're doing for you, Will, except maybe we'll charge the other people. I don't know. Anyway, so coming up...
only after they finish their AC exam, right?
No, we'll take your money anytime. All right, so listen, coming up next, we're going to get together again, and we're going to talk some more AC FAQs, including one that I know you're asking if you're watching this, and that is, what were our methods of practicing for the tasting exam? So stick around and keep learning more, keep getting dialed, doing your reps, and getting all the information you need to prep. All right, thanks, guys. Good one.
Cheers, beer geeks.
Good night.
Cheers, y'all.